What if the price of love was more than you could ever afford? Amelia's world was built on devotion to the man who promised her everything, only to demand a son in return. But when his empire crumbles and the truth is exposed, she faces the ultimate choice: destroy the man who betrayed her or reclaim her life and future. Will she be consumed by the power of his legacy, or can she rise above it, stronger than ever before? In a world driven by ambition and control, can love survive, or is it doomed to fall? Enjoying this thrilling ride? Then give us a like, subscribe, and turn on the notifications. Join our community for more stories that pull you into worlds filled with drama, secrets, and powerful twists. Stay tuned, you won't want to miss what's next. The night was still and quiet, as the city skyline twinkled with lights from the penthouse suite of Raxford Enterprises. The towering skyscraper gleamed, a symbol of dominance and wealth, and the man who had built it, Liam Raxford, stood at its helm, unrelenting, cold, and meticulous. At 42, Liam had already achieved what most could only dream of in a lifetime. A self-made billionaire, he had built his empire from nothing, battling through adversity, ruthlessness, and countless sacrifices. But behind his towering success was a man driven by a single force: control. Control over his empire, control over his employees, and, most painfully, control over his personal life. His office was a shrine to power: polished mahogany furniture, sleek chrome fixtures, and the most cutting-edge technology, all arranged with an obsessive attention to detail. Liam Raxford had never been a man to allow chaos to enter his life. Every move, every decision, was calculated, precise, and deliberate. But there was one thing beyond his ability to control: his family. In a world where he had earned the right to dictate terms to everyone around him, his family was still a delicate, fragile structure. And it was this very structure he now sought to dominate. Amelia, Liam's wife, sat in their lavish living room, her eyes cast down at the soft curve of her belly. At 30, she was beautiful, intelligent, and strong, traits that had once drawn Liam to her. They had been married for 5 years, their union built on respect, admiration, and the subtle dance of power. Amelia had always understood her role in their marriage: standing beside him, supporting him, and maintaining the image of the perfect wife. But now, as she cradled their unborn child, she couldn't shake the sense of suffocation that had crept into their relationship. Their first child, something that should have been a moment of pure joy, had become a source of unease. It was no longer just about the baby. It was about meeting Liam's expectations. For weeks, Liam had been obsessed with one singular thought: the baby had to be a son, a male heir, someone who would carry on the Raxford name, secure the legacy, and protect his empire. It wasn't just a wish, it was a demand. "Amelia, we need a son," Liam had said, his voice devoid of emotion one evening as they sat in the glow of a candlelit dinner. "If it's a girl, there's no future for her here. You know that. I can't have a daughter running this empire." Amelia, whose heart had once soared in the early days of their marriage, found herself drowning under his words now. A daughter is not good enough. The statement had stung in a way she hadn't anticipated. He made it clear that he needed a son to continue the legacy of Raxford Enterprises. A son who could inherit the power, the wealth, and the future of everything he had built. The months wore on, and the pressure continued to mount. Each visit to the doctor, each scan, seemed to heighten the tension. Liam would accompany her to every appointment, his face impassive, his gaze calculating. He'd ask the same question over and over: "Is it a boy?" And when the answer was no, his mood darkened. Amelia, once a woman full of hope and dreams for her future, now felt like nothing more than a vessel, a pawn in his game to fulfill his desire. She could see the impatience in his eyes, the tightness in his jaw whenever the doctor delivered the same news. It's too early to determine the gender. The words echoed in her mind like a ticking clock. I need you to understand, Liam had said, his voice steely and authoritative one night as they stood on their balcony overlooking the city. I have built this empire with my blood and sweat. Everything I've worked for, it cannot fall into the wrong hands. If you cannot give me a son, I will find someone who can. And when that happens, you and your daughter will have no place here. The words were a silent declaration, but they hit Amelia with the force of a physical blow. She stared at him, her chest tightening with a mixture of fear and sorrow. It wasn't just about their unborn child anymore. It was about her worth, her value in his eyes. Amelia knew her husband better than anyone. She knew how relentless and driven he was. He was a man who didn't take no for an answer. But this demand, this expectation, was beyond anything she had ever imagined. And yet, she loved him. She had always loved him. Despite the distance that had grown between them over the years, she had stood by him through every triumph and setback, even as his ambition had turned him into someone she barely recognized at times. But this was different. This was more than a demand. It was a declaration of her place in his world. Amelia's love for him and the unborn child inside her warred in her heart. Could she betray her own beliefs and give him what he wanted, knowing it would mean betraying herself? Or would she take a stand, risking everything, her marriage, her future, her sense of self? The conflict within her grew unbearable. Could she truly choose between the man she loved and the life she was building with her child? As the days turned to weeks, the storm inside Amelia's mind only intensified. Her love for Liam was real, but so was the suffocating weight of his control. The struggle between her devotion to him and her growing resentment of his demands felt like a battle she could never win. She feared that, no matter what, she would lose either way. As she lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, she wondered just how much more she could endure. The baby, her child, would be the key to her future, whether it was a son or a daughter. And in that moment of painful clarity, she realized something. This wasn't just about the baby. It was about who she would become. As the months passed, the once radiant joy of pregnancy began to dim for Amelia. The glow she had once carried so proudly faded, replaced by an overwhelming sense of isolation. The initial excitement of their growing family had long since been overshadowed by Liam's relentless obsession with securing a male heir. Each day seemed more like a countdown than a gift. Every moment spent awaiting the gender. Every appointment a new opportunity for disappointment. Liam, once attentive and present during their early days of marriage, had grown increasingly distant. His focus had shifted entirely to Raxford Enterprises, the empire that had consumed him long before Amelia had come into the picture. Meetings, deals, acquisitions, his days were swallowed whole by the demands of his business. And while Amelia understood the weight of his responsibilities, she couldn't ignore the widening chasm between them. He would come home late, never asking about how she felt or how the pregnancy was progressing. His interest in her health seemed to fade with each passing week. To him, the only thing that mattered was the child. A male child, one who could carry on the legacy of Raxford Enterprises. If the child turned out to be a girl, Amelia would no longer have a place in his life. She had become nothing more than a vessel, nothing more than a means to an end. At night, as she lay alone in their massive, cold bedroom, Amelia would often stare at the ceiling, her thoughts spinning in the silence. She could hear Liam's muffled voice from the other room, his voice rising in frustration as he barked orders to his employees over the phone. He was a man consumed by his own ambitions, and Amelia was the collateral damage. The bond they once shared seemed to evaporate with every passing day, and she couldn't help but wonder if he even noticed the pain in her eyes anymore. One afternoon, overwhelmed by a wave of loneliness and confusion, Amelia decided to reach out to someone she had kept at arm's length for years. Isla Bennett. Isla had once been a close confidant, a former executive at Raxford Enterprises who had worked alongside Liam for several years before their bitter falling out. Amelia had known Isla well, had shared countless hours of conversation with her, and had admired her strength and wisdom. Isla had left Raxford Enterprises after a scandal involving Liam's business practices, but the two women had stayed in touch, even though the tension between them had always been palpable. Amelia needed guidance. She needed someone to tell her she wasn't crazy for questioning everything that had once felt right. So, with a heavy heart, she called Isla. Isla agreed to meet, and they chose a quiet cafe on the edge of the city, away from the prying eyes of the elite. Amelia arrived early, her hands trembling slightly as she stirred her coffee. When Isla walked in, her sharp, confident aura immediately commanded attention. She looked as poised and untouchable as ever, her eyes sharp, her demeanor unwavering. After a brief exchange of pleasantries, the conversation quickly turned serious. "Amelia, what's really going on?" Isla asked, her gaze penetrating as she leaned forward. "You haven't been yourself lately." "I can see it." Amelia hesitated for a moment, the weight of her emotions threatening to overwhelm her. She had always been strong, always been the supportive wife, the perfect partner. But now, with the pregnancy weighing on her, with Liam's demands hanging over her head, she was beginning to crack. "I don't know anymore," Amelia admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I love him, Isla. I do. But I don't recognize him anymore. I don't know if he even loves me. He doesn't see me anymore. He only sees this child, the heir he demands. He doesn't care about how I feel, or about the fact that he's pushing me away. He only cares about his empire." Isla's expression softened. "He's always been that way, hasn't he? Ruthless, calculating. But you're not just a piece in his game, Amelia. You're his wife, the mother of his child. And you don't have to stand by and let him treat you like a tool. You have to fight for yourself, for your dignity, for what's yours." Amelia's eyes widened at Isla's words. "But I can't just walk away. If the baby's a girl, I'll lose everything. He'll cast me out of the family, the empire, all of it." Isla's face hardened. "What do you want more, Amelia? To live in his shadow, bound by his rules, or to reclaim your own life? You're stronger than this. I know you are. But you need to take control. You need to make a choice." The words hit Amelia like a lightning bolt. For the first time in months, a flicker of clarity pierced through the fog of her confusion. Isla was right. She had been hiding in the safety of submission, too afraid to face the consequences of standing up for herself. But what kind of life was that? What kind of example was she setting for her child if she allowed herself to be swallowed whole by Liam's demands? That night, as the sky darkened and the world outside seemed to quiet, Amelia sat in their living room, her thoughts churning with 1,000 emotions. She had been living in fear for too long. It was time to confront the truth, no matter how painful it might be. The decision weighed heavily on her chest. She could continue to live in Liam's world, controlled by his ambition, slowly losing herself piece by piece. Or she could stand up for herself, for her child, and face the consequences, no matter how devastating they might be. She knew that confronting Liam would be a risk. It could cost her everything. But she couldn't let her life be dictated by his cold, calculated desires any longer. She needed to find her voice, even if it meant shattering the illusion of perfection that had held their marriage together for so long. The next morning, Amelia found Liam in his study, working intently at his desk. His back was turned to her, and the weight of the moment hung heavy in the air. Taking a deep breath, she walked into the room, her heart racing. "Liam," she said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "We need to talk." Liam didn't look up. "Not now, Amelia. I'm busy." But this time, Amelia wouldn't back down. She stepped forward, standing tall, her eyes meeting his. No, Liam, this can't wait any longer. I need to tell you how I feel. His eyes flickered with annoyance, but there was a crack in his icy demeanor. I don't have time for a lecture, Amelia. I'm not giving you a lecture, she replied, her voice firm. I'm telling you that I'm done. I'm done living in the shadow of your empire. I'm done being controlled. I'm done with the lies. You don't get to dictate my life anymore. For a brief moment, there was silence. And then, for the first time in a long while, Liam Raxford was the one who looked unsettled. The air inside the hospital room was thick with anticipation, but not the kind of excitement most women experience when going into labor. Amelia was fully aware of what this moment represented. It was the culmination of months of pressure, fear, and isolation. But today, it was more than just the birth of her child. It was a final test. A test of everything she had endured and everything she would face in the coming years. Liam stood at the edge of the room, his expression stoic, a stark contrast to the chaos unfolding around him. The sterile white walls and the cold, clinical environment seemed to amplify the tension that hung in the air. He stood near the window, his arms crossed tightly, as if trying to hold back the storm of emotions he refused to show. His eyes flicked to the clock every few minutes, impatient, restless. He hadn't said much since they arrived, but his presence was a constant reminder of the stakes of this moment. For Amelia, every contraction felt like a wave crashing over her, each one more intense than the last. Her breath came in sharp gasps as she clenched the sides of the bed, her face contorting in pain. She could hear the faint sound of Liam's foot tapping against the floor, the nervous energy in his movements betraying his carefully controlled exterior. He had insisted on being there for the birth, though it had been clear from the start that this was not a moment of celebration for him. He was there for one reason only. "Amelia," he said, his voice low and strained, "just remember, it has to be a son. You know what's at stake." Amelia's eyes briefly flickered to him, her chest tightening. His words were cold, calculated, as if his empire could crumble with the wrong gender. A son. Only a son. She didn't respond. Instead, she focused on the sharp, unrelenting pain of labor. She was beyond words at this point, beyond even the thoughts of what would happen if the baby wasn't a boy. There was no time for fear anymore. There was only the promise of an unknown future. Hours passed, and with each minute, the tension in the room seemed to escalate. The nurses moved around the room in a flurry, their voices a blur of instruction. The sterile smell of antiseptic mingled with the bitter scent of sweat and fear. Amelia's body had been pushed to the brink, her exhaustion visible in every tremble of her limbs. She was no longer just a woman in labor. She was a battlefield, caught between the two forces of love and rejection. Liam's gaze never wavered. He was the perfect picture of control. But Amelia could see the tightness around his jaw, the way his fists were clenched at his sides. He didn't care about her pain, only about the child, only about the heir. The doctor finally arrived, a calm presence amidst the storm. "Amelia, we're almost there. Just one more push, and you'll be holding your baby." Amelia nodded, her breath ragged, and gathered every ounce of strength she had left. She closed her eyes, focusing on the moment, and pushed once more. The room fell into a deep silence as the world seemed to pause. Time itself held its breath. The cry of the newborn shattered the stillness. The doctor held up the baby, his voice filled with clinical warmth. "It's a girl," he announced, the words ringing in the room. Amelia's heart sank, but her body was too exhausted to feel anything other than relief. She had done it. She had brought a life into this world, a precious, perfect life. But as the doctor handed the baby to the nurse to be cleaned, Amelia's eyes turned toward Liam. The fury was instantaneous. Liam's face, once so controlled, twisted into an expression of cold, seething anger. His eyes widened, and his breath hitched as his gaze locked onto the baby being tended to in the corner of the room. His fingers gripped the edge of the hospital bed, his knuckles turning white. The room seemed to grow colder with each passing second. "No." Liam's voice was low, barely audible, but it was thick with rage. "No, this cannot be happening." Amelia, still weak from the delivery, turned her head toward him, her voice barely above a whisper. "Liam, it's a girl." The weight of his eyes upon her felt like an unbearable force. He took a step forward, his face a mask of fury and disappointment. "I told you," he said, his voice icy, each word like a dagger. "I told you it had to be a son." Amelia's breath caught in her throat. She had expected his anger, but hearing it so raw, so venomous, took her by surprise. "You." Liam's words faltered for a moment as he struggled to maintain his composure. "You couldn't even give me that? After everything I've done for you, for us, this is what you give me?" Amelia's heart shattered. His words were a brutal reminder of what she had already known. To Liam, she was nothing more than a tool to create the heir he so desperately needed. The love they had once shared seemed to evaporate in that moment, replaced by cold, calculating demand. "I did everything I could," Amelia whispered, tears welling up in her eyes. "I tried, Liam," but her words fell on deaf ears. The look on his face was one of pure disgust, and she felt her heart break further with every passing second. Liam turned on his heel, pacing the room, his anger escalating with each step. He shot a venomous glance at Amelia, his words dripping with contempt. "I have no use for a daughter. No use for you if you can't give me a son." The words stung more than the sharpest blade. Amelia felt as though the world had crumbled around her. In that moment, the empire she had once been a part of, the life she had tried to protect, no longer mattered. Liam's voice broke through her haze of disbelief. "You've failed me, Amelia. If you can't give me a son, then there's no place for you here. I'll take care of the child. But you can leave." Amelia closed her eyes, the tears silently falling down her face. She had never imagined this moment would come. She had never thought it would end like this. But here she was, alone, rejected, and betrayed by the man who once promised to love her. And as she held her daughter in her arms, a small, fragile piece of hope, she realized something far more important than the son Liam had demanded. She would fight. She would protect her child, no matter what. The pain, the rejection, she would face it all. Amelia sat in the quiet of her new apartment, the silence a stark contrast to the chaos of her past life. The walls were bare, save for a few pictures of her daughter, Lily, hanging in the living room. The apartment was small, but it felt like a sanctuary, a place where she could breathe again. It was a far cry from the grand, sterile mansion she had shared with Liam, but here she was free. The days following her departure from Raxford's empire had been a blur. Liam's cold rejection still echoed in her ears, but the pain had begun to dull, replaced by something far more powerful. Determination. She had lost everything. Her marriage, the life she had worked so hard to build, the family she had thought she was part of. But she had her daughter, and that was enough. Amelia spent her days in a whirlwind of activity. She found a lawyer to help her with the custody battle over Lily, knowing that Liam would fight tooth and nail to gain control over their daughter. The thought of Lily being raised in the world Liam had created, a world of manipulation, power, and cold ambition, was something Amelia would not allow. She couldn't bear the thought of her daughter growing up believing that love was a currency to be bought and sold. That worth was determined by what you could give to someone else. She took small steps, but each one brought her closer to reclaiming her life. She started taking meetings with other women, businesswomen who had left their own toxic relationships and had rebuilt their lives. They were women of strength, of resilience, and they became her lifeline. Through them, Amelia began to see the possibility of a future where she wasn't defined by Liam's cruel expectations. She enrolled in business classes, her mind still sharp from her years of involvement in the Raxford Empire, and slowly began building a network. Amelia knew she had the intelligence and drive to succeed on her own. Without Liam's name, without his empire, it was a matter of refining herself, reasserting her independence, and becoming the woman she had once been before Liam's ambitions had trapped her in a gilded cage. But every time she thought she had taken a step forward, Liam would pull her back. The first time it happened was subtle, like a whisper in the back of her mind. One morning, as she was getting Lily ready for daycare, Amelia received a call from an unknown number. She hesitated before answering. Amelia! The voice on the other end was smooth, almost too calm and unmistakable. Liam, I've been trying to reach you, he said, his voice dripping with false concern. I've had our lawyers draft up some new documents regarding Lily's custody. You're making a mistake, you know. If you think you can raise her without me, you're mistaken. Her pulse quickened, but she kept her voice steady. I'm not making a mistake, Liam. I'm doing what's best for her. There was a moment of silence, and Amelia could almost feel the cold smile on his lips. Is that so? You think she'll be better off with you in this tiny apartment, struggling to make ends meet? You think you can protect her from the world I've built? You've always underestimated me, Amelia, and that's a mistake you'll regret. The conversation ended with Liam's familiar threat, more of a statement than a question. I'll see you in court. Amelia's heart pounded in her chest. She had prepared herself for this. She knew Liam would never let her go quietly. But hearing his voice again, the calm, manipulative tone that had once been so comforting, was enough to send a shiver down her spine. He wasn't just going to let her walk away. He wasn't done yet. The next few weeks were filled with phone calls, emails, and increasingly hostile encounters. Liam wasn't just fighting for his daughter. He was fighting to regain control over Amelia. He used every trick in the book: guilt, threats, and isolation. He would show up at her apartment unannounced, his tall figure blocking the doorway as he pressed her with questions about Lily's well-being. You're not capable of raising her, Amelia, he would say, his voice cold and calculating. You need me. You need my resources, my name, my connections. You can't do this without me. You think you're strong, but you're weak. And I will make sure the world knows it. Each time he showed up, Amelia would hold her ground, but the strain of his constant manipulation began to weigh on her. She could feel herself slipping into the shadows of his control once again. His presence reminded her of how easily he could break her, how easily he could make her feel powerless. But she wouldn't let it happen again. Not this time. The final straw came when Liam hired a private investigator to follow her every move. He wanted to know where she went, who she spoke to, what she did with her time. He was desperate, and it was becoming increasingly clear that the war between them wasn't just about custody. It was about power. He was trying to force her to come crawling back to him, to show her that she was nothing without him. But Amelia was done being a pawn in his game. One evening, as she sat at her desk going over some legal documents, a thought struck her. A thought that felt like a bolt of lightning. Amelia had been digging into Liam's past for months now, looking for any evidence she could use to strengthen her case in court. And in one of the old business files, she had found something, a secret that could undo everything he had worked for. It was an old business deal, one that Liam had tried to bury. A shady transaction involving insider trading and illegal deals that could send him to prison if it was ever exposed. The evidence was clear, the documentation irrefutable. Liam had done everything he could to keep it hidden, but now Amelia had it in her hands. The moment she realized the full scope of what she had uncovered, a surge of power coursed through her veins. This wasn't just about a custody battle anymore. This was about freedom. Freedom for herself and for Lily. She had the leverage to bring Liam to his knees, to strip him of his empire and his pride. Amelia sat back in her chair, a new fire burning in her chest. She had never imagined using his secrets against him, but now she saw the opportunity. Liam thought he had everything under control, but now the tables were about to turn. The next day, Amelia made her move. She hired the best lawyer she could find, one who specialized in corporate corruption and financial fraud. She met with them in secret, and together they devised a plan that would turn Liam's world upside down. They would use the evidence she had uncovered, slowly, strategically, and in a way that would leave him with no way out. As she walked out of the lawyer's office, a sense of empowerment washed over her. The battle was far from over, but now, for the first time in years, she was the one in control. Amelia stood before the towering gates of Raxford Enterprises, her heart beating steadily against the silence that enveloped her. The world outside was bustling with the usual energy of the city, but here, at the very heart of Liam's empire, it felt like time had stopped. She had walked these halls many times before, but now it was different. She had a purpose, a power she had never possessed in the past. The memories of her life with Liam, the lavish dinners, the cold silences, the unrelenting pressure, flooded back in a rush. But as she stood there, the weight of his empire looming before her, it wasn't the woman she used to be who walked into the building. It was the woman she had become, the woman who had learned to fight, who had found her voice in the face of crushing despair. The moment she entered Liam's office, she saw him. He sat behind his massive desk, the very same desk that had once felt like an intimidating symbol of power. He looked up when she walked in, his eyes narrowing with a flicker of surprise, then disdain. "You are not welcome here, Amelia," he sneered, leaning back in his chair. His tone was as cold as ever, but beneath it there was a tinge of unease. "What do you think you're doing? You think you can come back into my world after everything?" Amelia stood tall, her posture strong and defiant. Gone was the timid woman who had begged for his affection, for his approval. The woman in front of him was someone he no longer recognized, and that, in itself, was her power. "I'm here to take back what's mine, Liam," she said, her voice unwavering. "I'm done living in your shadow, done being manipulated by your twisted sense of control. You think I'm just a tool for you to use, but I'm not. I'm a woman, and I'm going to take what I deserve." Liam's face darkened. "You think you can stand here and talk to me like this? After everything I've done for you? For our daughter?" Amelia stepped closer to the desk, her eyes locked onto his with an intensity that made him flinch. "No," she said, her voice low and firm. "After everything you did to me, Liam, everything you've done to us. You've tried to break me, tried to use me as a pawn in your empire. But I'm not your property, and I'm not afraid of you anymore." Liam's hand clenched on the edge of his desk, his jaw tight with anger. His empire, the one he had built piece by piece, was slipping away from him. The walls he had constructed around himself, around Amelia, were crumbling, and it terrified him. "You think I'm going to let you just walk away with everything?" he hissed. "You'll never survive without me. I will ruin you, Amelia. I'll take Lily from you. I'll destroy your reputation, and you'll be left with nothing. You think the world will support you? They'll see you for what you are, weak, broken, and no one will care about you or your little business. They'll all choose me. I'll make sure of it." Amelia's heart hammered in her chest, but there was no fear in her eyes, only a quiet, unwavering resolve. She had seen the depths of his cruelty, and now she understood him better than he understood himself. "You've already tried to ruin me, Liam," she said, her voice steady. "And look where that's gotten you. You've tried to manipulate me, control me, and scare me into submission. But it's over. I'm done being afraid. And now, you're the one who should be scared." Liam's eyes narrowed. "What are you talking about?" Amelia pulled a folder from her bag, setting it on the desk between them. She opened it slowly, her fingers brushing the documents inside. The same documents she had uncovered, the ones that would tear down everything he had built. The ones that exposed the illegal deals, the fraud, the lies that had been buried for years. Liam's face paled as he recognized the papers. His composure faltered for the first time, the confident facade cracking. "You're not the only one who knows how to play dirty, Liam," Amelia said, her voice now calm but powerful. "These documents prove everything. The corruption, the insider trading, the illegal deals you thought you could get away with. I've got everything I need to take you down, to take this empire down." For a long moment, the room was silent. The tension between them was palpable, thick with years of unresolved anger, betrayal, and pain. Liam's eyes flickered from the papers to Amelia, his face a mask of fury. "You think you've won?" he spat, his voice low and dangerous. "You think you can tear down everything I've built and walk away unscathed? You'll never escape me, Amelia. You'll never escape this." Amelia's gaze softened for a moment, but only for a moment. "I'm not the one who's trapped, Liam. You are. You've been living in a cage of your own making, and I'm the one holding the key. You've spent so many years convincing yourself that you're untouchable. But I've learned the hard way. No one is invincible. Not even you." Liam's eyes burned with rage. "I'll make you regret this. You'll never have Lily, and you'll never get what you want. I'll destroy you if I have to." The threat hung in the air like a sword, but Amelia didn't flinch. "You don't get to threaten me anymore, Liam. You don't get to control my life. I'll fight you with everything I have, and I'll win." The final showdown between them wasn't just a battle for control. It was a battle for their futures, for their dignity, and for their daughter. Amelia knew that the stakes were higher than ever. She had what she needed to destroy him, to tear down his empire piece by piece. But she also knew that doing so would come at a great cost. Liam's empire had been built on lies, on manipulation, on power. But Amelia's strength came from something far greater: truth, love, and the unbreakable bond she shared with her daughter. She would not be the one to destroy everything, but she would be the one to build something better. She would create a future for herself and Lily, a future where they weren't defined by Liam's toxic grasp. The final decision hung in the balance. Should she use the leverage she had gained to destroy Liam once and for all, leaving him with nothing, or should she allow him to keep his empire, choosing a quieter, more peaceful life with her daughter? Free from the legacy of the past, the moment of sacrifice had arrived. The decision would change everything, no matter what path she chose. The aftermath of the final showdown between Amelia and Liam was nothing short of seismic. The world that Liam had so meticulously constructed, built on ruthless ambition, manipulation, and fear, was beginning to crack at its very foundation. Amelia had won, at least in the most immediate sense. She had fought for her dignity, for her daughter, for a future free from the toxic grip of Liam's empire. But the battle, she knew, was not just personal. The public fallout from their confrontation would reverberate through the very core of the business world, exposing the underbelly of Raxford Enterprises and the man behind it. In the days that followed, the media frenzy was impossible to escape. Headlines screamed about insider trading, corporate corruption, and the illicit deals that had been kept hidden from the public eye for years. The very empire Liam had spent decades building was being pulled apart by the truth. But it wasn't just his business that was crumbling. It was his carefully constructed image. For so long, Liam Raxford had been seen as a cold, calculating genius, a man who couldn't be touched, who had mastered the art of power and control. But now, as the scandal unfolded, the facade began to shatter. The cold, untouchable billionaire was no longer invincible. His vulnerabilities were laid bare for all to see. His ruthlessness, his obsession with control, his manipulation of everyone around him, even his own wife. For the first time, the world saw him for who he truly was. Amelia watched from a distance as Liam's world crumbled. She didn't feel triumph. She didn't feel relief. Instead, she felt something far more profound, a quiet sense of freedom. The man she had once loved, the man who had destroyed her sense of self, was now facing the consequences of his actions. But Amelia was done with him, done with his empire, his manipulation, and his broken promises. For the first time, she felt the weight of years of control lift from her shoulders. It wasn't just the end of her marriage to Liam. It was the end of the version of herself she had been forced to become in order to survive him. She stood strong, holding her daughter in her arms. Lily was the symbol of her victory, not just over Liam, but over the past that had nearly consumed her. The tiny, perfect girl in her arms was everything Amelia had fought for. She wasn't a product of Liam's empire or his legacy. She was Amelia's own legacy, a testament to her resilience and strength. As the days turned into weeks, Amelia began to carve out a new path for herself. She didn't need Raxford Enterprises, and she didn't need Liam's approval. She had learned how to stand on her own, how to fight for what was hers, and how to build a life based on her own terms. She returned to her business ventures, a new sense of purpose fueling her every move. The network of women she had connected with became her support system, her strength. She was no longer defined by her past, by the life she had once lived. Amelia was reclaiming everything she had lost, and so much more. Her daughter, Lily, would grow up knowing that a woman's worth wasn't defined by the men around her, but by the strength she carried within. Amelia would be the mother who taught her to stand up for herself, to never settle, and to always, always fight for what she deserved. But as Amelia stepped into her new life, free from Liam's toxic control, the story didn't end there. The world was watching as Liam's empire collapsed. It was a spectacle, a dramatic fall from grace that no one could ignore. But there was something that still lingered, a shadow in the background. The media coverage was far from over, and the whispers of a powerful force behind Liam's downfall started to surface. Rumors began to circulate that there was more to the story than the public was being told. Was Amelia's fight for freedom really the end of the Raxford legacy? Or had she unknowingly triggered something even darker? Was there someone else in the shadows, pulling the strings, waiting for the perfect moment to seize power? And then came the final twist, the revelation that would change everything. One evening, Amelia received an unexpected visitor, a lawyer with news of a strange clause in the Raxford family trust, one that could potentially undo everything she had fought for. A clause that would give Liam's empire a second life, even if it meant destroying everything she had just built. Liam, cornered by his own demons, had left behind a secret, a legacy that might not be so easy to escape. As the lawyer presented the papers, Amelia felt the ground beneath her shift once again. The future she had worked so hard to build seemed more uncertain than ever. The empire she had helped to topple had left behind a dangerous echo, and the battle wasn't truly over. Liam's empire might have crumbled, but what was left in the rubble? What would Amelia choose now, with the revelation that there was something even more insidious waiting to rise from the ashes? Amelia stared at the papers in her hands, her heart pounding. She was no longer the woman who had been controlled by fear, but this new threat was different, more dangerous, more subtle. It wasn't just Liam's empire she was up against anymore. It was the very system that had allowed him to rise to power in the first place. The path ahead was unclear. Would she use this new leverage to destroy the last remnants of Liam's empire once and for all? Or would she face an even greater challenge, one that could put everything she had worked for in jeopardy? As the chapter closed, the fate of Amelia's future, The legacy of Raxford Enterprises and her relationship with Liam were left suspended in the air. The story wasn't over, not yet. The twists were far from finished, and the future held more secrets, more battles, and more choices that would define Amelia's destiny.